Greetings and hello. My name is Tamara Thorpe. I am best known as the Millennials Mentor, and I'm here today to talk to two more authors who contributed to Making Connections, a handbook for effective formal mentoring programs in academia. I'm excited to be here today with the authors of Chapter 7, The Crucial Role and Responsibilities of a Mentoring Program Coordinator. I'm here today with Michael Christiansen and Don Busenberg. Both of them have a really interesting background that I hope we get a chance to talk about. Mike currently is a full-time faculty member at Utah State's Utah Basin campus, where he teaches a variety of courses in science. And has been on their mentoring committee for the last 2 years. Don is also a full-time lecturer at Utah State in mathematics and statistics, and has just recently gotten involved with mentoring as well, and has been chair of the mentoring program there. And I am so excited to talk to both of you because both of you come from a background in STEM, not a background in mentoring. And so I would love to hear from both of you about how you developed this passion, this drive, this desire to become so heavily involved in mentoring. Mike?
So in my field, which is chemistry, there is actually a lot of mentoring involved because we do a lot of lab research. It's all of my traditional academic background and history professionally involved me being mentored by other faculty and senior students. And along that way, I was positively impacted, obviously, by many different mentors. So I've always had from the beginning that enthusiasm and energy for mentoring infused into me. And that is translated into my career as a faculty member. I began as a young faculty member, mentoring several students and doing lab research and seeing them blossom into different careers, including, I think, my very first mentee that I had in the lab was a mentee who went on to become a successful physician and is now working at a hospital down in Florida here at Utah State University. And that was a wonderful experience. And I think that, as I'm sure you probably recognize, and anyone who mentors does, you receive a tremendous amount of joy and satisfaction from being able to help a student to grow and learn and then become a professional and a colleague. It really is an incomparable amount of joy and satisfaction that I get from that experience. And that, of course, is something that I had a lot of experience with in chemistry because of that direct one-on-one and also one-on-group mentoring that goes on in the lab. And so very naturally transitions over to mentoring in a regular academic sense as we do in our mentoring program. And so I think that's kind of where my mentoring enthusiasm background comes from.
That's great. Thank you. How about you, Don?
I would say I'm very similar to Mike. I remember in college a faculty member in my undergrad program kind of took me under his wing. I was his first college football player that he'd ever had in the math program. And he took me under his wing and mentored me and guided me and helped me along the way towards the end of my finishing up my undergrad. And of course, my college football coach was a great mentor to me, Lavelle Edwards and others. And so that kind of helped me as a coach. I mentor students, players to help them be better. Mentor students. Being a math teacher, a lot of people struggle with math. I'm always amazed how many times I'll meet with people and they'll say things like, oh, I'm just never good at math. And so having to tutor and work one-on-one, kind of like Mike said in chemistry, I've had the opportunity to work with students and mentor them and help them along the way in mathematics. And so that's been a great opportunity. And really, as Mike said, very rewarding for me personally. And I have several of my mentees that I've worked with over the years here at Utah State that are out working in the field of mathematics. One is teaching down in Texas currently, and he's hoping to get his master's and doctoral degree eventually in mathematics education. And I've been able to help him, and I work with other teachers as well. And so I think it's almost a natural program, in that I think all of us can identify mentors, people that helped us along our journey, and it's just our way of being able to give back in a informal or formal setting. And the mentoring program, I've been with the mentoring program since its inception here in the Uinta Basin campus.
Well, thank you both for that. I appreciate what you shared, because I think so many of us are inspired to do more mentoring because the experience is so rewarding. As you said, Mike, there's so much joy that comes from seeing people grow and learn, and then to be able to see that progress over time. And coming from STEM backgrounds, where those might be subjects where people would be naturally asking for help, that building in a formal mentoring program seems like a really great fit. And so as I was reading your chapter, and if I'm wrong, you can go ahead and tell me I'm wrong, but I sensed that angst that comes. I sense that your chapter was seeking to relieve the angst that people feel when someone comes to them and says, we need you to start a mentoring program, and then trying to figure out, okay, I've had mentors, I've been mentored, I've probably mentored, but those experiences are really separate and different from what it actually means to be a program coordinator or a program manager and design and implement a mentoring program. So when you were writing your chapter, what was one of the goals that you two had as you were putting this together?
I think that the primary focus of the chapter is kind of, as you foreshadowed, how to organize a mentoring program. Now, the literature out there is, there is a lot of peer-reviewed literature addressing qualifications and the kinds of things that mentors should do. There's also a lot of literature, or some literature, on mentees, but there's very little, if any, literature addressing what the program coordinator or administrators over such a program might do, frankly. And so our chapter's goal is essentially a guide on how to start or organize a program, and it focuses specifically or somewhat on the role of the mentor program coordinator, the sort of administrator over that group. So it's kind of, we're sort of forging new territory in being able to describe that coordinator's role in being able to start from having zero mentoring program to having a functional mentoring program that will also be self-sustaining, so that it can continue going after that program coordinator has sort of passed the torch to a successor, for example. In that chapter also, we go through, I guess, that process and hopefully break it down. And also in the chapter, we strive to write it in a way that would be general enough that it could apply to both academic and non-academic institutions. So for example, if there are businesses or other institutions that are not academic settings, how could they also implement and organize a mentoring program and be able to carry it out? And so the chapter is written broadly enough to be able to cover, hopefully, a mentoring program coordinator, or sorry, a mentoring program of some such at different institutions, both academic and non-academic.
Yeah,
Mike?
certainly, right. Oh, sorry, Don. I just want to say, right, in my work, I do a lot of work with people like you who've been tasked to put together a mentoring program. So Don, I want to hear from you in terms of sort of what your goal and vision around that is. And then also, can you talk a little bit about how important that sustainability piece is?
Yeah, so I would just add to Mike's really quickly that I think what we've tried to do is provide a framework, kind of general enough, as he said, could be implemented. Also, we talked about characteristics we think would make a good program mentor, coordinator, so they could do the program. I think one of the things about sustainability that you brought up is that we also focused on the evaluation piece in terms of making sure that the program is evaluated, and you should vet the program in the sense that you need to see, okay, is it meeting the goals of the program? Are you actually following the program with fidelity that you've implemented. And then if you've done that and you see issues arise, for example, matching of mentors, mentees, there could be problems we need to adjust, or maybe we didn't consider some of the logistics with matching those, and that could be an issue that we need to address. So we don't think this is a static program. It's more a dynamic program in that it's always being edited and adjusted as it goes. And we also feel like each group that wants to implement a mentoring program should be able to implement in a way that works best for them. We've had experiences with different campuses implementing in the Utah State statewide campus organization. And for some sites, how they do it is different than another site. And it doesn't mean they're wrong and we're right or vice versa. It just means that for their needs, based on faculty, based on students, based on programs, they need to implement it a little differently. And so we didn't want to be prescriptive in the chapter, but just kind of give a general framework of here's some things you need to consider, the type of program coordinator you're going to put in, some phases that you can go through, what the responsibilities are, and how to make sure that you evaluate that. And I think those are things that we tried to cover in that chapter.
Yeah, thanks for that. I certainly, as I said, as I was reading through the chapter, I could see very clearly, right, really wanting to give people some guideposts, some guidelines for how to tackle this, because it can be extremely overwhelming, whether you're in higher ed or in the private sector. Most people who are implementing a mentoring program also have other roles and responsibilities. So it can be quite a daunting task to take on such an initiative that you feel passionate about, but also can feel quite cumbersome. So, so Mike, can you tell me a little bit about what you think? I know in your chapter you lay out 6 phases of a mentoring program, but let's talk specifically as if I've been tasked with the role of program coordinator. What are some important skills that I have, or some important things for me to think about as I'm getting started?
Yes, excellent. I'm glad you asked that question, Tamara. One thing that I wanted to do is share my screen, and I forgot to ask if you had enabled us to be able to do that. So
All right.
I'm going to click share screen. Yeah, so I think that you'll have to adjust the settings on your end. Do you need some help on doing that, or okay? Oh,
I've got
yeah, I think
that done.
Yep. I think that works. So I'm going to go ahead and share the slide here. So this is hopefully you can see that. Okay. So this is the slide that I think you're referring to. We have this slide, and I realize this slide. Can you see it okay on your end, by the way?
Clear.
Excellent. So I realize the slide looks a little complicated, but this is sort of one of the key focuses of our chapter, where we go through these 6 different phases. 5 of the phases are actually based from literature. We added the 6th phase ourselves, which is funding and sustaining the program. Don was talking about sustainability a little bit. In order for your program to not just die on the vine, you have to have these phases 5 and 6 have to be in place, and they have to feed back into phases 1 through 4 continually, with sort of a recalibration as the program goes on and evolves. Otherwise, your program won't last, essentially. And so, as complex as this might look, maybe a little daunting to the reader, I promise that in the chapter we do break it down and explain each of these phases and their sub-steps within them in a way that is hopefully articulated clearly enough for people to be able to reproduce. So again, the initial question that you asked, I think, was about the program coordinator. How would you even begin to sort of undertake designing a program? We go through that in the chapter beginning with phase 1. Now, phase 1 is defining the program. This is sort of where you're just talking about theory. What I would suggest for anyone who might be in a position of being a program coordinator or be tasked with the responsibility of organizing a mentoring program is just start by assembling a small group of people who are also enthusiastic and energetic about mentoring and care about students or other potential mentees for your institution. Then you can go through these different I guess, steps of defining the program. And really defining the program phase, all that is trying to identify the problem or goals of your program, lay down a theory upon which your program would base, and begin to assemble support structures for the program. So you basically start with baby steps and you move forward trying from the very beginning on being able to establish a foundation of ideas and goals upon which the program will be built, and then also clarifying a framework upon that, bringing in administrative support, and then gradually building up from there as you go through these phases. We don't actually get to carrying out the program until we get to phase 4, which is implementation. So we go through all of these phases, and all of this is being very, very careful to structure, to plan, to lay out and design and figure out the goals, the objectives, and how we will assess and evaluate those goals, bringing in with us administrative support structures. And then eventually, once we have all of that laid out, and you do want to make sure that you spend a good amount of time in these first 3 phases, getting the foundations right, then we go to implementation. And then, of course, as we go through implementing, and we also eventually collect data, assess, and then evaluate, and then as needed, go back and recalibrate and readjust the program. So hopefully that all made sense. Did that answer your question adequately, Tamara?
It did. And Don, I want to ask you, because you had brought up evaluation. So as you look at these sort of 6 phases and the steps there, the sort of one of the principles of success comes up of sort of having the end in mind, right? And so that idea of at the beginning, knowing the problem you're trying to solve for and thinking about how and what you're going to evaluate at the very beginning. If you're starting with the end in mind, that's a key to sustainability. Am I getting that right, Don?
Yes, exactly. And I think Mike did a great job kind of explaining through the steps. And I know it looks daunting because there's a lot of steps there, but I think that a lot of those kind of go hand in hand together. But I agree with you 100%. If you have the end and goal, and the end and goal should be that the mentors are meeting with mentees with fidelity, and that they are meeting those needs. And that's where we want to make sure that the I guess it's getting to the end of the row, as they say, right? So that we can then see that the evaluation isn't just evaluating the program, it's also evaluating those mentors and mentees if they're being involved in the program. Sometimes mentees sign up for it, but then maybe aren't as interested. Sometimes mentors sign up and don't realize what they really need to do. And so there's some processes we want to make sure to evaluate, not just to see if the program's effective, but making sure that it's meeting the needs of those in the program. And so it's definitely important as you design that to think about, okay, what we're going to evaluate, how we're going to evaluate that, whether it's monthly surveys, whether it's a phone call, however you want to do that. Those are things that you need to consider as you go forward with the program, which then leads to the last part, which is sustaining the program so it continues on. Because a lot of programs like that, once you lose the person at the top, the program coordinator, someone that's the enthusiastic person, and you put someone in that maybe isn't as enthusiastic, that's when the program starts falling apart. But if you keep that evaluation piece, that can help in maintaining that.
Yeah, so it acts as a kind of quality control
Yes.
throughout the program that allows us to monitor and evaluate the experiences people are having and where and how to adjust the program as we go, that I think, Mike, you had referenced. But important that you all mentioned, right, is that, not every mentoring program looks the same or needs to look the same, but knowing what we want to accomplish and defining that in that phase 1 of, what's the problem, you said, Mike, what's the problem we're trying to solve for? What does the end result look like if we have succeeded in solving that problem? And so if we start with the end in mind, that sets us up for greater opportunity for sustainability. So tell me, because you both have sort of been consistently working on a committee in a program, and we're inspired to write this chapter to support program coordinators. And certainly there are aspects of these phases that are important for every mentoring program, but what have you seen in your experience really contributes to the overall success of a program coordinator as they're applying and implementing these phases?
I think one of the keys to being a successful mentor program coordinator is having enthusiastic mentors. So that can be challenging sometimes, but thankfully we've been very blessed here at our campus and at Utah State University institutionally at having a lot of faculty members who are very high energy and very enthusiastic about helping students. One of the keys of being able to achieve that, of course, is making sure to train your mentors well and to make it so that your mentoring program is designed voluntarily. So we never have compulsory mentoring. In fact, there's a number of different articles that we cite in the book chapter that emphasize the importance of making sure that mentoring is not compulsory, it is voluntary. That way you sort of, in a sense, sift out those who actually want to from those who would not. And that sort of helps bolster your program. Even if you have a smaller cohort of people participating, it's much better to have a smaller cohort of people who really want to be there than a large number of people who do not. I think another key important thing about mentoring in general is the importance of reciprocation. One of the questions that I was looking at on this for this podcast was that question about what you think is the most important thing about the successful mentor-mentee relationship. And it is reciprocation, I think. What I mean by that is I have mentored many different students over the years, and the relationships that have always ended up being successful and positive are ones in which my mentees actually respond when I reach out to them by email or text or phone calls. And it is a mixed bag because everyone's different. And I have some mentees that do that very well and some mentees that do it less well, and then a lot of mentees in the middle. And that is also true of mentors. So for mentors, they need to make sure that they reciprocate and actually reach out to students. And when students ask questions, they need to actually respond. And the students also need to do the same in reverse. And then I think that the same thing is true of the mentoring program coordinator in general. Program coordinator kind of acts in a way as sort of a supervisor of sorts over a number of different mentees and mentors. And particularly the mentors needs to be a resource who actually steps in when the mentors have questions and reciprocates and supports them in their work in mentoring.
Thanks. Don, how about you? What have you seen as a key factor in these phases that really contributes to the success of a mentoring program?
I agree with what Mike said, but I might also add, I think it's important that you have open communication. I know when we first implemented the mentoring program, because of our enthusiasm, thought, why wouldn't everyone want to do it? Why wouldn't everyone want 40 mentees? And reality sets in when faculty starts saying, wait a minute, I don't know if I can handle 40 mentees, or we find out that not all the students need a mentor because they're at different stages. Some are very familiar and comfortable with college. Some are at the end and just have a semester or two. Others are at the beginning and they're not sure what they need. And so it becomes a challenge. So that open communication, that dialogue with faculty, with the mentors and with the mentees, I think someone with that enthusiasm to help explain the program. And as we talked about sustainability, one of the things that's important too is training faculty, but also evaluating that training so that as you come back, you can say, oh, you know, that we thought we trained them well on this, but we found out they didn't really understand as well as we thought. So we need to adjust that training. And so that communication, that listening to make sure you're finding out, okay, this is working, this isn't working, those kind of things, I think help to build that trust, to build that good relationship with the faculty, with the students, and then develops a good mentoring program.
I appreciate both of you sharing that because I think, right, it goes to, where our conversation started, that so many of us have had the experience of having mentors and perhaps being informal mentors to different people at different stages in our life. But when we participate in a formal mentoring program, our obligations, our responsibilities in that mentoring relationship shift a little bit and perhaps require more. And we can assume quite easily that people understand the word mentor, so that they should understand what those responsibilities and obligations are. But what I'm hearing from the two of you is that, one, you really cannot communicate enough to a mentor mentee what the responsibilities and obligations are within a formal mentoring relationship, and how important those conversations are in the sort of success of recruiting the right mentors and maintaining those mentors and ensuring successful mentoring relationships. Am I hearing that right?
Yes, I would totally agree, and just say that a lot of us, as you mentioned, already do mentoring of some kind informally. This just becomes a way of tracking and maybe finding out how well it's working, where we're having confusion, or where we're having issues, where we're struggling. But it takes that informal piece and makes it a little more formal. In terms of time, it might feel like a little more time, but I mean, I would do it anyway, I think. Every faculty is different, but obviously it's easier, like Mike, if he has them in the lab, it's easier to mentor them right there than someone that may not be in your class, but you're trying to reach out to, et cetera. But it's just a way of making sure the program is running the way you want it to, and having a way of evaluating that by collecting that data to then say, okay, we are meeting the needs, or no, we're not, and we need to then adjust accordingly. But like I said, to me, it doesn't feel like a lot of extra time. It's just a more formal way of collecting the data and evaluating is what we're really doing. I think that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that oftentimes as faculty members, even if you're in a place, or even if you're not in an academic setting, oftentimes you're doing mentoring anyway. Organizing an official program for us, really all that is taking the mentoring that we're already kind of doing and putting it in a more organized crystalline structure. So that's a little more structured, so that we're actually evaluating or assessing and evaluating it, and giving rewards, encouragement, and acknowledgement for the stuff that's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, right? I think it is one of those things that very often in our day-to-day interactions, we are informally mentoring folks, serendipitously mentoring folks. And when you start to put a little structure on it, faculty members or executives and managers can suddenly feel like, oh no, another thing I have to do, but don't realize that we're really trying to kind of capture and hone in on practices that may be happening naturally. And if they're not, put in some structures that ensure that whether they're students or early career talent or people we want to see succeed and move up through an organization, are really getting the support and resources they need through those conversations.
Yeah, in effect, it's kind of like there's a lot of mentoring that probably already is happening at your institution. So all we're trying to do is just organize something to be able to do, like you say, capture and acknowledge the mentoring that's probably already going on, and maybe direct it a little bit more organizedly if necessary.
Yeah, and I think it's to the point that you all made, right? Is that very often we will see initiatives in organizations and institutions start because there was an individual who was particularly passionate. And that passion is great. It gets something started, but one individual's passion is very rarely sustainable. Right. And so being able to put structures in place where other people who maybe are less passionate about getting something started, but equally passionate about mentoring and supporting talent and students have a framework, they have a pathway, they have a guidebook, they have steps that are going to articulate for them how to continue to run a program and make it happen. So as we are thinking about folks reading this chapter, folks taking away all the wonderful nuggets of information you've shared here and you share in your chapter, I'd like us to think about quickly, right? As imagining I have just been given the task to make a mentoring program happen. What is, out of everything you've shared, what is a must-have from both of you? What is a must-have no matter what?
I was thinking about that earlier. A must-have is a team of great mentors and people who are enthusiastic about mentoring. So that's probably where I would start, is just looking around at your colleagues and maybe talking to them. And that's kind of how our program informally and then eventually formally started out here at our location, is a bunch of faculty and some administrative staff people starting to talk about mentoring and finding the people who are really enthusiastic about it. That's how we started to cobble a team together.
Yeah, it's funny, Mike said that because that's exactly what I had on my list as well, is you need to find that good faculty, those people willing to do the mentoring and that have the similar enthusiasm, passion that you have maybe for the mentoring, or similar ideas in that way, and then do it, start implementing. And if you're worried, start somewhere and get something going, and then adjust and adapt and edit as you go, because it's not, like we said earlier, it's a dynamic program where it's always should be changing as you adapt to the needs of your organization.
And so given that many folks often have few resources and little time, what is something that is nice to have if we can make it happen? What would be a nice to have?
Yeah, that question's a little bit harder. I think that nice to have, but not absolutely necessary. There's probably a few different things, but one of them would be, I was thinking about stuff like administrative recognition. For example, we have out at our campus Mentor of the Year awards, or like maybe have like a newsletter or a Mentor of the Month or something. You don't have to have that, but I think that's something that's nice to have. It's a way of showing support for the mentoring that's happening. But if you don't have it, but still have a culture of mentoring beyond it, you can still have a functional mentoring program. But that's always a nice, beautiful icing on the cake of having administrators, bosses, managers who are actually acknowledging publicly what you do.
Yeah, mine was similar with administrative support, both them supporting the program, which Utah State's been great in terms of supporting faculty. And I even put a nice to have, and not necessary, but in role statements, maybe for faculty, having that included, a mentoring piece where a lot of faculty have 90% teaching and 10% service, or 60% research and 40%, or whatever that is. If you could add a little mentoring piece part of that, maybe it's part of the service, maybe it's just part of the role statement, would be a nice to have, but not necessary. But again, that goes back to the administrative support for the program.
Yeah, and in a private industry setting, that would probably look, when we talk about role statements in an academic setting,
right?
Academics know what that means, but in a private setting, it might be contracts. So you have a contract or some kind of thing that says specifically your duties. Folding into that mentoring as a piece, it would be beautiful. And it's kind of the same equivalent. And you'd have to have administrative backing to do that.
Yeah.
So that part of the responsibilities that you have and the acknowledgement that you get for the work that you do involves mentoring.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, as we, cultures are shifting, change has been happening in our institutions and organizations the last 2 years, the last 10 years, the last 2 years, quite intensely. And I love the idea of shifting our roles and our understanding of our roles so that they include time for mentoring and being of service to others within our institution. I love that. And I think if we do, right, having support from Our administration is a wonderful, nice habit, does make a difference in being able to recognize mentors for their contributions. But not having those should not stop people from moving forward with a mentoring program. And so what from your perspective would be something we could live without? Again, imagine I'm first-time program coordinator. I've read your chapter. There's a lot here, but I've been told I've got to make this happen right away. What could I live without?
I think one thing is lots of paperwork. So lots of paperwork you can live without, and lots of unnecessary meetings. So we do have to have meetings, especially with our team. I try to make sure that the number of meetings that we have on the committee that I chair is reflective of the need. So I don't just have meetings for the sake of meetings, and I make sure to try and make those meetings very targeted, focused, and agenda driven, so that we are just focused on exactly what needs to be accomplished that is relevant, and not just, having a meeting for the sake of wasting everyone's time with a meeting.
I love
Mine were the same, except I'd also add, and Mike kind of alluded to it, the paperwork. I think sometimes we can get so caught up in trying to evaluate everything when we need to stay focused. What is our problem we're trying to solve? Have the end in mind, and keep that limited to very short when we do our surveys, do our evaluations. Keep that very small. We can live without all the other stuff if we can stay focused, because sometimes you can start asking questions. All of a sudden the survey is 100 questions. You're like, oh my heck, and I can live with all that without that if I can focus on what do I really want to accomplish there.
Yeah,
that's a good point. Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, like, that's an excellent point, because during that design phase that I showed on that slide earlier, you really have to make sure that you think very intensely about what your objectives are, and how you're going to determine or measure whether or not you're achieving them. In other words, you don't build a house by just running out and throwing a bunch of bricks together. You have to spend a lot of time, probably more time designing it, or as much time designing it as you do the actual building. And the same thing is true of mentoring program. So we spent a lot of time making sure with our assessments and evaluations that we focused on what are the key questions. So the way we do it is with monthly surveys for our mentors and mentees. What are the key questions that we actually need to have answered in order to assess and evaluate our program? And we had a lot of discussion making sure that we threw out any extraneous questions, any extra data that wasn't really capturing or relevant. And that's kind of going to what Don said. We need to make sure that we are not making a 100 question survey where 90 of those questions are not really relevant. You need to make sure that you focus on what you're really trying to achieve. And a lot of that is kind of comes or builds out of how important that design phase is.
Yeah, I appreciate you reinforcing that, right? That it's really important that in that phase one, where we're identifying the goals and thinking about what we want to accomplish, is really key to getting started. And that this doesn't require a lot of people and a lot of paperwork and a lot of processes, but really that this idea of formalizing a program, we can keep it simple, right? By honing in and focusing on what we want to accomplish, minimizing paperwork, minimizing meetings, which we know we all could do with fewer meetings. And in that evaluation, keeping those simple. And Don, I appreciate you really making clear that we want to hone in on what's most important to evaluate, as opposed to all the possible things that we could evaluate. I want to thank you both so much for your contributions to the book. Your chapter 7, The Crucial Role and Responsibilities of the Mentoring Program Coordinator, I think is much needed. As you had stated, Mike, at the top of our conversation, this is a place where a lot of research has not been done, but certainly we know, you know from your experience, and I know from my work, that people who are mentor program coordinators are often doing it for the first time, and rarely know how to get started and what's the right thing to do. So I think that this is such an important and crucial chapter to this book on effective mentoring. And I'm excited for people to read it, for folks to listen to this conversation. And I want to thank both of you for your contributions and for today's conversation.
Thank you, Tamara.
Thank you, Tamara. It's been wonderful.